From surfing the web for hours, to online blogging, and eventually to messenger apps. If you're new here, hi, my name is Jacqueline, and welcome to Color Me Well, a channel where mental health and diversity conversations collide. On this week's episode, Denise and I are discussing the roots of where social media started for us, and that was the internet. We talk about what platforms we used and how this eventually led us to learn how to communicate with people, whether it was people across the pond or just in our very own backyard. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this blast from the past episode of Color Me Well. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Color Me Well. My name is Jacqueline.
And I'm Denise.
And today's topic is actually one of my favorite topics, and I'm really excited to talk about it and bring it back to mental health, but also diversity, and it's all about social media. Social media is just, it can be fun, it can be destructive, but I want to really get into the starting point for both of us because we both definitely had different experiences starting off with social media, with technology, the internet in general. I originally started, my whole love of the internet when I was in elementary school. It was very young, but I remember I could hear the dial tone going off in my head. You're trying to connect on the phone, having to tell like family members, do not pick up the phone. I am on the internet, like don't disrupt my connection. And I would sign on right away. I remember the first website I went to visit was spicegirls.com because I was obsessed with the Spice Girls at the time. And so I thought it was connecting to them. It was such a weird relationship that I started off with the internet. But eventually I continue to explore websites. I was just really excited for this whole new world, and then eventually got connected to chat rooms, and that eventually led to other platforms as well. So Asian Avenue was this, it wasn't necessarily like a platform. I think it was basically made to be like a website domain. A lot of the community was like Chinese, they were Filipino, Japanese, like it was just that primary population, but a lot of other people used it. I used it. Being South Asian, I was like, okay, why not? And got myself an account, but it eventually became this larger community of people from my elementary school just all gravitating towards it, creating their account. And I remember when I made it, I had no experience with HTML. I had no idea what I was doing. So my friend took over and she made my website, and I remember it looking like basically that episode of The Simpsons where Homer gets like his own website. It's just this bundle of chaos. So but I didn't really tell anything about myself. So the main focus in Asian Avenue was the guest book. And so you would just leave all these like comments for people. Some people had conversations, but I think the interesting part was that you could see everybody's posts. So in the end, people were having these really in-depth conversations sometimes, sharing their life story. And I remember just looking at all of this and feeling super insecure and being like, oh man, this person's talking to this person, like that's so cool, and like I want to talk to them. And so I would start leaving comments on everybody's like guest books. But then when you went to school, you wouldn't even talk to that person, not really like properly anyway. So you would see them in the hall and they would be with their crew, you would be with yours. And so it was just this big toying of emotion I found when I was like younger. So that was, I guess, my first learning lesson with some sort of internet platform, social media type of platform. But since you said you didn't have it, Denise, what did you use growing up?
Yeah, it's interesting because, you'd think that with the way you're describing Asian Avenue, I would have had some sort of access to it. So I don't know if it was maybe big in the Canadian Asian community. And because I was in the Philippines, I didn't have as much access to that. But in the early 2000s, the social network site that was really popular was Friendster. So I think from how you've described Asian Avenue, I think it was fairly similar. I truthfully actually can't remember too many like its features anymore at this point, but I do recall it had some sort of wall, similar to the guest book that you were talking about with Asian Avenue. I remember how back then it wasn't really about who from your existing social network um, was connected to you online as well. I remember the way we used it was to add more friends outside of our actual social circle in life. And so it was really not uncommon for people to either have multiple profiles or to be adding all of these random profiles of people that they were only partially connected to. So, you're constantly adding people who you don't really know, because you wanted to, collect friends in a sense. And it wasn't until I moved to Canada that I actually flipped the switch and started using social media the other way. When I moved from the Philippines and came here, that's when I started feeling this need to reconnect with people that are no longer in the same time zone. So what I ended up starting to use was this blogging site called Xanga. But essentially, I did see that online journal as a way for me to, be able to keep in touch with my friends back home because, unlike when I was still in the Philippines, I couldn't pick up the phone and talk to them anymore. Now I had to essentially post all of my stories online so that they can read it while I'm sleeping, and then they'll respond to those stories afterwards. So it wasn't until I came here that I really, saw social media as a way to kind of like supplement my existing social circle in real life.
Mhm. And then how often like would you sign on to Xanga? Like how like when you were starting with that, like was it for like an hour? Was it less?
I can't remember how long in a day I would use Xanga, but I definitely logged on pretty much every day, either to write a new blog post or to check the comments that my friends may or may not have left. And I remember it would be literally every day you would log on just to see if there's any activity on your site until I guess we started university, and then you get internet on your phone. You start getting internet on your phone, and then it becomes like 24/7 access to all of these social media platforms. How about you in terms of whether it's Asian Avenue or any other social media platforms that you had back then growing up in grade school or high school? How often did you use it?
I definitely was online for a very long time and like to like I wouldn't say like I would go into like the hours of the morning or anything like that because our computer was located right outside my parents' bedroom. So if I were to like stay on the computer, they would know. So I would definitely be on for at least more than an hour. I want to say I would cap it at maybe three and a half
Mm,
because the internet was just like this endless world. And so I definitely had a platform similar to yours, and you used it at one point too, but it was LiveJournal, and we we definitely it was something that I feel like the same purpose was for you, but like at the same time you had friends that you were trying to connect with back home. For me, it was just another way of connecting with the world around me. So I think I used the internet and any sort of social platform to be able to just connect with people
mm,
in ways that I felt like I couldn't connect with in real life. And so I put a lot of time and effort into those specific platforms like Asian Avenue or even LiveJournal. And then that eventually stemmed into, and I think I used this simultaneously, but I did LiveJournal, and then I started using MSN and ICQ and AOL Instant Messenger. So I was using like 4 or 5 different things at the same time. I'd be checking all these different places just to see for comments, for likes, for who's online, who's not online. Um, I would take that first time of my 5 minutes on MSN changing my name depending on the song that I was into at the time. I would change the color of my font, the type of font that I was using. Like, there's so much that went through my mind every time I signed on, or even prior. Like, and it's just so interesting because you spend the whole day sometimes with people and then you just sign on again to keep connecting with them. And so when with LiveJournal, yeah, it was still that sort of public domain where you're putting all of your thoughts into this public world of like, it could just be anything. For me, I was very vague with a lot of my posts. Like, I would talk about experiences and about people, and I would just like kind of just get into this whole this kind of descriptive emotion that I was going through, but then I wouldn't be very specific. And so a lot of my comments were, who are you talking about? What's happening? Whereas with MSN, AOL, ICQ, it was my opportunity to connect with people on a very personal level. And so I put more time and effort into that. And like, it took a big toll on my teen years, and just going from my teen years up till throughout high school, I was always just on. And I think it just affected me in the sense that it just really I didn't know how to really connect with people anymore in terms of conflict. And I think a lot of the time there's so many games that you can play even on Messenger itself. Like, I know that there were these trends of people would sign on constantly, like, so sign off, sign on, sign off, sign on, so that their crush would see them, or like a person they're not speaking to can see them. And I remember seeing this happen. Like, I would see somebody's name pop up like 5 times, and I'm like, what is going on? But that was the trend. That was the thing. And so it was just really interesting. I think just the amount of effort I put into such a, something that, like, in the end, just kind of, it gave me more skills to be able to use in the workplace, like typing, but like, it didn't really give me the social skills that I would have liked. But did you end up using any of these platforms, and how often, and how did it affect you?
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned this trends on MSN. I mean, I definitely used MSN for sure. And I remember, at that time, I had started dating this guy. And so he had logged on, and right before he was going to log off for after we chatted, he changed the status to to the lyrics of Justin Timberlake's "My Love." And I remember seeing that and just overthinking it like crazy, because I was like, oh my gosh, he just talked to me. And I remember this train of thought, completely unfounded on anything other than him changing his status on to like a new lyric that he liked of a new song. So I thought that was really really funny, looking back at it now, the impact, the unconscious impact that MSN had on us.
And it's a lot of like romanticizing, because in the end, you're
Mm-hmm.
all of your relationships, your friendships, um, your interactions in general with just all these walks of life people, and you don't even know, like, you're not really, unless you're a direct person being like, hey, what does this mean, you're not really asking or trying to like probe people, unless like you're a really close friend. And I probably only had one really close friend on MSN that I would have those honest conversations with, and it was like we talked about everything, and that was great. But with everybody else, it was like a lot of subtext and a lot of like reading between the lines, and it
Yeah.
was more of a dance and more difficult, I felt, on my mental health than I would have liked it to have been. But I didn't realize that that was the effect it was having on me.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very true. And even just, I think it felt like you were having a very like private and personal interaction with that person. But in the end, it's just so easy to, for example, be able to just sign off on that person
Mm-hmm.
when you're upset with them, or if they said something wrong, rather than being like, hey, this made me mad. um, and I think like that's what ended up happening with a lot of my interactions. It would just be very easy for me to shut off the computer or just, start giving these one-worded answers, and I'm not giving any emotion or any sort of context for that person to understand where I was coming from.
Mhm.
So as much as it tried to connect people, I felt like it just did the opposite sometimes. And normally there's a more organic ways of being able to connect with people, but we always felt like this, at least for me anyway, for that specific point in my life, I felt like that was the only way to have an organic conversation. So when I met somebody like my partner, who is not a social media person at all, who did not really even use Messenger that often, except to talk to me when we first started dating, it was so bizarre to me, and it was just such a big learning curve.
The way that we surf the internet and the type of platforms that we use were so different from what we use today. Or are they? Stay tuned for next week's episode where Denise and I continue the conversation around the more recent platforms that we use for social media. Have you used any of the platforms that Denise and I had mentioned today? If so, comment below and let us know, but don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel and share this video as well. Thank you, and stay tuned for next week.